All right. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Byron Assidious. Today, we're going to be taking a look at doing a brief review of Alan Dean Foster's Cyber Way, published in 1990. Alan Dean Foster is one of those rare authors in the sci-fi scene who, despite the wealth of material that he's put out into the market and into the world, has yet to strike me as tossing up any duds. One of my favorite books of all that I have done a review for was his The Man Who Used the Universe. Powerful story, an amazing read in the genre of sci-fi. I would recommend anybody pick up and give that story a read through. This is the fourth work of his that I have read. And like the prior three, I've come away from Cyber Way wholly satisfied as a reader, as someone who is not necessarily as heavy into the sci-fi genre as many readers. I'm much more of a fantasy and a horror guy, but I do enjoy sci-fi when it's well written, and I have yet to be let down by the works of Mr. Alan Dean Foster. I've got a ton of Foster books to read through that I have in my possession, thanks to the gigantic batch of paperbacks I got from my buddy at work a couple of years ago, and I am slowly but surely working my way through them. As I do with many books that I intend to read and take note of. And actually, I didn't initially start off intending to do a review of this book. I was just going to pick it up and read through it and see if it was any good. And after about 20 pages, I realized I need to break this down for a review because it is excellent. It's an older work, and it deserves some love and some highlighting. And again, it is Alan Dean Foster's Cyber Way. I'm just going to share a handful of the notes that I took as I was reading through the story, and then I'll skip past most of my handwritten notes in the handy-dandy review book here and move along to the actual review itself. But my first note was that this book had a strong start to establishing the environment and setting of the story. Foster is an expert with certain framing and sideline observations. Example: man adapted to the world, and the world adapted to man. It seemed the only thing man couldn't adapt to was man himself. An interesting line to consider. My next note, and I'll touch upon this in the actual meat of the review, Foster is frankly bottled lightning with the introduction of in-lore slang and fictional terminology, utilizing surrounding context and approximations to real-world words and terminology with appreciable aplomb to establish tone and function. The primary character of Detective Vernon Moody of the Tampa Bay Police Department takes general shape quite quickly into archetype with only a few paragraphs, which allows for further superb character establishment and development, which Foster wastes no time in settling into the reader's framework. Within a couple of paragraphs, we have a working, functional, mid-level archetype of primary character, which leaves a lot of time to further establish and build him into a completely realized three-dimensional character. And Foster does it with great skill. He's quite talented with character work. Here's another, I found early on, brilliant exchange or framework. This is something that comes from Moody's perspective. He had joined Tampa Police Department because he had a desire for excitement and sophistication. What a letdown to discover that in a highly charged urban environment, these were merely euphemisms for more degenerate forms of crime and behavior of entertainment. That's a brilliant exchange. That's a brilliant line, if you ask me. It's wonderful. A small detail from page 44. The blowers attached to an advertising video holographic display. Apparently, these include olfactory sensations to advertisements. Now, this has cropped up in several speculative sci-fi settings over the years. It's kind of neat to see it just kind of dropped in a subtle, quick mention here. Again, something you've seen in other sci-fi stories, but it's neat the way it was folded in so naturally and without excessive focus. And before going on to the actual review, one of my favorite lines was uttered by the character of Sergeant Paul Oolji. "Your expression speaks eloquently, even when your mouth is closed." That's a fantastic line and observation, and I almost want to find a way to work this line, to fold this expression into a daily conversation. Great narrative or dialogue exchange in fiction often does that. Some of the best lines that are spoken aloud by a character in a fictional framework, you yearn for a way to find a framing for it to be used in your day-to-day life. And this line spoke straight into that part of my brain. But let's move on now to the actual review. Characters. I would give an 8 out of 10. From our lead protagonist, the slightly chubby Detective Vernon Moody of the Tampa Police Department, to his temporary assignment partner, Sergeant Paul Oolji of the NZPD of Arizona, to the antagonist, Yistin Gagi, to the late entry of the story, Samantha Greyhills, the principal cast of Cyber Way is skillfully exhibited to readers as natural, fully formed persons. The only cause for me to take a couple of points off in this vital category is the occasional lean with Oolji's character towards some stereotypical mannerisms ascribed to Native Americans, and the fact that the story's lead, Moody, has a few moments that seem really out of character in the back third of the book. And that's something that we'll touch upon, the back third, again in this review. Plot, 8 out of 10. Without giving the plot away, I know it's a little late for spoilers. This book came out back in 1990, but trust me, I don't want to spoil anything for you because I'm going to recommend this book. I will say that while it relies on the classical sci-fi cautionary framework of, beware ever man's hubris, it does so without getting too heavy-handed through most of the work. World building / scene flow, 9 out of 10. Foster is a wordsmith through and through, natively folding in jargon and alternate world elements so effortlessly that within the first 15 to 20 pages, readers are quickly and seamlessly dropped into the world of the story without missing a beat. Narrative voice and technique, 9 out of 10. The story's focal point is usually fixed on Detective Moody and his frame of mind and reference, and the story unfolds quite naturally in a way that fits perfectly to his mentality and personality. On the few occasions when the point of view alters, so too does the linguistic presentation, but not so much as to feel alienating to the audience. The book uses jargon, yes, but never depends on it wholesale, which is easily fumbled by less talented storytellers. Pacing, 5 out of 10. It is unfortunately true that even some of my favorite works of fiction over the years suffer in at least one area, and in Cyber Way, it's with the pacing. The first 2/3 of the novel are incremental and effective, but the last third of the book floods readers with a whole load of events, tearing along at such breakneck speed as to be almost disorienting. So fast was it that upon the climax of Moody and Oolji's attempts to stop Gagi, there's literally only a few pages of immediate aftermath remaining. All of that rather, navel-gazy. In conclusion, Alan Dean Foster's Cyber Way. has some electrifyingly great lines. Characters that you could see being in the room with you as fully formed persons, an intriguingly thoughtful premise regarding art itself and the way it intersects with technology, and a setting so alive and tangible that it defines the notion of getting lost in a good book. Only the pacing really mars what is otherwise here a triumphant example of near reality speculative fiction, and I cannot help but recommend giving it a read. So if we go mathematically through the categories, we've got an 8 plus an 8 plus a 9 plus a 9 plus a 5. That gives us a 39 over 5, divvy it out to a 7.8 for an average, but I'm going to give it that plus 0.2 because of some very memorable lines, as the one I referred to there from Sergeant Ulji, to give it an 8 out of 10. For sci-fi fans, I cannot stress enough, you should find and grab yourself a copy of Cyber Way. For general audiences, just folks who enjoy a good read, generally speaking, at least borrow it from your local library or borrow it, digitally. There's plenty of, I believe it's called Overdrive or something similar. There's a lot of public library systems that are willing to lend ebooks through their digital archives. Borrow the book if that's your only solution. Give it a read because it is enjoyable. Even if you're not the sort of, I need to analyze and tear down everything like the nerd on the screen in front of you, like this toothless dork. It's definitely well worth your time if you are partial to the written word to give Cyberway a chance. And that's all for me for now, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.